boys and girls. Today we are going to have something about Eastern and Western literature. And we are going to compare Chinese poetry and Western poetry. Okay, first, let's get to know something about Chinese poetry. Okay, Chinese poetry is the principal genre of Chinese literature. Okay, genre means form, okay. And the second point is poetry became well established as a literary form during the Tang Dynasty. And Chinese poetry is characterized by its compactness and brevity. Okay, here, brevity means conciseness or simpleness. There were no epics of either folk or literary variety and hardly any narrative or descriptive poems in Chinese poetry. So that means in Chinese poetry, there will be no epics. So here, epics, that is what we say. But epics always or often appear in Western poetries. Yes. This is the feature of Chinese poetry, suggesting the theme of Chinese poets came from radical life, the heights of ecstasies, and the inspiration of sorrow and sympathy. Okay, here we have a lot of words describing people's feelings and emotions, such as ecstasies means great delight, and sorrow, sympathy are two common feelings or emotions. So from this part we can see Chinese people always express their feelings by writing poetry. Yes. And generally, pronouns and conjunctions were omitted, and one or two words often alluded to highly complex thoughts or situations. Okay, here, pronouns such as it, he, we, they are pronouns, yes. And conjunctions. Conjunctions is what we say, yes, 连词. Okay, all these words were omitted. So that means when you are reading Chinese poems, you will not read any pronouns or conjunctions. And one or two words often alluded to highly complex thoughts and situations. And here I would like to introduce a very famous form of Chinese poetry to you. That is 绝句. Yes. It is a style of poetry that is popular among Chinese poets in the Tang Dynasty. 绝句poems are always in the style of quatrains. Okay. A matched pair of couplets with each line consisting of 5 or several syllables. Okay, here I would like to say this word, quatrains. It means a poem which is consisted of 4 lines. That is what we say, 四行诗. A matched pair of couplets. I think when we are having our spring festivals, you will see each house will, yes, okay, have some couplets on their front doors. Yes, couplets means 对联 or 对句. Yes. Okay, with each line consisting of 5 or 7 syllables. Syllables means 音节. And thus, the 5-syllable form is called 五绝. Yes, such as this famous poem. Yes, this is typical 五绝 poem. Yes. And yes, as you can see from this poem, yes, each line consists of 7 syllables. So that is what we call 七绝. Yes. Okay, this is a brief introduction of Chinese poetry. And now let's come to the second part. British Romantic poetry. And British Romantics valued emotion, passion, and individuality. That means, okay, Romantics always thinks emotions or passion or individuality is the most important theme of any poetry. And nature, rural life. Okay, here rural life means country life. And pastoral imagery made common subjects for poetry. Okay, this is the common subjects for British poetry. Okay. And individual achievements were also highly valued or prized in British Romantic poetry. Okay. And now let's get to know 6 representatives of great British Romantic poems. Okay, the first one we are going to know is William. Okay, you know this man? Yes, he is William Blake. William Blake was famous not only for his poems, but also for the illustrated plates on which he printed them. Okay, here, the illustrated. You know what does that mean? Okay, yes. It means yes. Okay, with pictures. Okay. And this is his very famous poetry. Okay, that is songs of innocence and of experience. Now let's take a look at this one. And this one, William Blake's famous works were likely those in songs of innocence and of experience. Okay, this is his most famous work. Okay, now let's go with this picture. Okay, The Marriage of Heaven and Hell. This is William Blake's another very famous book. And his personal spirituality and his views of theological issues frequently filtered into his work. Okay, perhaps most famously in The Marriage of Heaven and Hell. Another one is Jerusalem, 耶路撒冷. Okay. And I think maybe this is the most important poet in great British Romantics. Okay, he is William Wordsworth, as you can see from the pictures. Okay. And yes, Samuel Taylor Coleridge is his best friend. William Wordsworth was one of the domineering. Okay, here. Domineering means, the most important one. Figures of British Romanticism. He was a good friend with Coleridge. Yes. And as you can see, this is the, Lake District, where these two or a group of poets live in. And now, let's see. William Wordsworth and Samuel Taylor Coleridge settled in the Lake District in northwestern England. And this group was often referred to as the Lake Poets. That is what we say, yes, 湖畔诗人, yes. And This work, Lyrical Ballads, 1798, is co-written by William Wordsworth and Samuel Taylor Coleridge. In 1798, Wordsworth and Coleridge anonymously 匿名地 published a collection of poems entitled Lyrical Ballads. Many critics cited the publication of this volume as the true beginning of the Romantic period. So this is a very important work in this time. And in the second edition of Lyrical Ballads, Wordsworth added a preface which outlined his aesthetic theory and his views on what made for good poetry. This preface was often considered as a manifesto of Romantic ideology. Okay, manifesto means 宣言. So this is a very influential work. Samuel Taylor Coleridge's poetic skill stood on its own. Rhyme of the Ancient Mariner was a narrative poem that was a mix of traditional ballad form, adventure story, and a tale of spiritual redemption. Okay, here, redemption means atonement, 救赎. And here we can see this is a narrative poem, and this form of poetry never appears in Chinese poetry. Kubla Khan, 忽必烈汗, was slightly less famous as a poem, okay? And this one is Byron, yes. Okay, Byron is different from Wordsworth and Coleridge. He was one of the few British Romantic writers to achieve widespread fame during his lifetime. So in this way, we can say Byron is a lucky poet. And this is his representative work. Byron's contribution to the period came in the form of the Byronic hero. Okay, here, Byronic hero. 拜伦式英雄. Okay, this hero is a boldly defiant, but bitterly self-tormenting outcast, proudly contemptuous of social norms, but suffering for some unnamed sin. So this guy is both lucky and unlucky. Yes. And as you can see from this picture, yes, this is Percy B. Shelley. Okay. Maybe you are familiar with this very great poet, right? Everybody knows his very famous work, Ode to the West Wind, right? Percy B. Shelley was in many ways a stereotypical degenerate artist. Okay, here, degenerate means, okay, yes, 堕落的. And Shelley was constantly in debt, often on the move, and deliberately provocative in the face of established traditions and social norms, prizing artistry and social rebellion above stability and acceptance. Just like Byron, he is also an outcast. He is also rebellious. So these two are good friends because they have a lot in common, right? And this is very famous sentence in his Ode to the West Wind. If winter comes, can spring be far behind? Yes. And this one, a very young face, right? Yes, he is John Keats. And when we are looking at this young face, yes, we will feel a little bit sad because he died at a very young age. John Case was the prodigy. Okay, prodigy here, it means talent, 奇才,天才, of the Romantics. He was an enormously prolific writer. Prolific, that means during his short life, he has written a lot of works. Though dead at age 25, he was stubbornly insistent on maintaining his artistic independence. His poetry, though distinctly romantic in flavor, was unlike any of his contemporaries. So we often say the article, the style is the man, 文如其人, yes. Because he has his own style, he was different from his contemporaries. So when we are reading his works, we can recognize it was Keats. And this is one of his very famous work, that is Ode to a Nightingale. Yes, 夜莺颂. And this one is his another very famous poetry, that is Ode on a Grecian urn. Okay, here Grecian means Greek,希腊, yes. He was best known for his sonnets. And in Chinese poetry, we don't have such a form. This is a typical Western one, yes, 14行诗, yes. And odes. Odes is what we call 颂歌, yes. Particularly Ode to a Nightingale and Ode on a Grecian urn. And Keats was also well known for his love of the classics of antiquity. Antiquity means something of the ancient time, which filtered into his poetry. And that's all for today's comparison between Chinese poetry and Western poetry. Okay. Thank you for your attention. See you next week.